People assume the greatest threats are the ones they can track, quantify, or map on a chart. Economic downturns, market contractions, interest rate cycles. But there is something moving right now through the inner solar system that no telescope on Earth can currently see, and this is precisely why the scientific world is quietly more anxious than anyone will admit publicly. It is not invisible because it's small. It's invisible because it slipped behind the glare of the sun into the brightest region of our sky, into the very furnace that sustains all life on our planet. And now, for this brief moment, humanity is blind. What we are watching right now is a real-time cosmic event unfolding behind a wall of light. We cannot see it directly, we can only trace its wake. And what makes this moment so unsettling is that, for months before it vanished into that golden curtain, observatories around the world were tracking this thing non-stop. Professional astronomers, amateurs, space agencies, AI sky surveys. Every serious telescope network on this planet had its eyes on it because they knew this moment was coming. They knew the perihelion was approaching. They knew that once it crossed that threshold, it would enter a state of transformation that no human eye could witness. We would only get the data after. The changes happening right now, whatever they are, remain hidden inside light so intense it blinds even the James Webb. Imagine that. The most powerful optical instruments we've ever built, the same ones capable of dissecting atmospheres of exoplanets hundreds of light years away, are powerless. The sun simply saturates everything. It's as if nature placed the most important phase of this object behind a cosmic firewall, allowing transformation to occur off camera. But here is where things get more interesting. Even while it is invisible, we still detect ripples, not footage, not images, but consequences. Solar wind variations, magnetic fluctuations, changes in photon scattering. Think about that. We are not watching the object directly, we are watching how the environment reacts to it. That alone should force anyone to pause. Because we usually study comets by the light they reflect. But here, the object is influencing space itself. Its chemical jets, its vapor, its tail, all of this is interacting with the solar wind in ways we can only infer indirectly. It's like trying to understand the shape of an animal you can't see by watching how the grass moves around it. And there is another layer of tension. This isn't a comet from our system that we've seen before and can model. This is not like Halley's Comet or Hale-Bopp, where we have predictable cycles and established behavior patterns. This is a visitor from outside, a traveler that did not originate under our sun's rules. When it vanished behind the solar glare, it did so at the most critical moment of its journey, the moment where its composition is literally being rewritten by radiation, and we won't see the result until it emerges again on the opposite side. Scientists are waiting the way soldiers wait for reconnaissance, not entertainment, but intelligence. Because whatever reappears will not be the same thing that disappeared. The heated coma, the sublimated ice, the fractured surface, the redistributed dust. If something cracks, fragments, splits, or behaves in a way that breaks existing models, we won't know until it returns. And this delay, this blindness, is creating a psychological tension that no economic forecast could ever replicate. The markets fear volatility. But this is uncertainty at an existential level where our models of physics might not be enough. And the most haunting detail of all? We don't know whether we're waiting for an answer or a warning. To understand why researchers became genuinely unsettled, you have to consider one fundamental truth. Space objects don't change their identity mid-flight. A comet doesn't act like one type of object in January, then suddenly behave like something completely new in March. In astrophysics, stability is everything. If you want to model a comet, you use simple parameters: albedo, mass, orbit, composition. If you know those values, the behavior should be boringly predictable. But this one refused to stay inside its own category. It didn't brighten like an excited tourist near the sundae, it mutated. When this object was still visible, researchers saw something so dramatic that it caused entire research groups to rewrite papers before publication. The brightness of this thing didn't just increase, it detonated. Instead of a gentle, incremental rise, this object jumped to 5 times its original luminosity. For a while, astronomers thought the instrument was malfunctioning. Then multiple observation systems confirmed it. And this is where the problem begins. Brightness is not merely light. Brightness is matter transforming into energy, chemistry turning into vapor, molecular bonds breaking apart. To increase luminosity at that scale, something on the surface had to undergo a violent transition. But what triggered it? Why then? Why at a point where typical comets are still relatively dormant? Then the second bombshell hit. It was not behaving like a normal icy object at all. The chemical signature flipped like a switch being thrown. First, it acted like a frozen carbon-based object CO, two plumes, exotic ices, strange ratios, behavior unlike anything catalogued. Then, weeks later, without warning, it suddenly started venting water vapor like a standard comet, as if it had shifted identities, as if some deeper layer had been unlocked, as if we weren't looking at one type of object but two stacked on top of each other. That's the moment many researchers quietly admitted something. This wasn't simply a piece of ice that drifted here. This was a relic from somewhere older and stranger. A piece of chemistry from a region of the galaxy where the rules may be different. Some astronomers even proposed that what we're witnessing isn't simply sublimation, but a staged release of materials. Like a layered stratigraphy, first the outer shell, then a deeper core, each reacting differently under the increasing pressure of solar radiation. Pause here and think carefully. This means its internal structure may preserve cosmic history in layers, like tree rings but written in frozen alien matter. You can see why people stopped comparing this to normal comets. This is not a dusty snowball. It might be a preserved archive, something that carries the memory of processes humanity has never directly seen. When an object changes brightness by a factor of 5, that's not noise, that's a declaration. Something within it woke up. And this revelation sent a subtle shockwave through the scientific community because it forced an uncomfortable question. If this object can change its nature under solar pressure, what else can it do that we do not have equations for? When you deal with economics or politics, uncertainty is frightening, but at least it's within human error margins. Here, uncertainty means the underlying laws might have exceptions. That is a different category of fear, a deeper one. Because if this object is rewriting its behavior in front of us, then our models aren't simply incomplete, they're fragile. And this is why researchers are waiting for its return on the far side of the sun with almost obsessive anticipation. Not because they expect closure, but because this could expose something we never expected to find. The brightness wasn't an anomaly. It was a clue, a signal, a nudge in the dark saying, your assumptions are not safe. And the next piece of this puzzle only intensifies that discomfort, because the way this thing moves is statistically impossible. Most interstellar visitors don't arrive neatly aligned with anything. They burst into a star system like cosmic debris thrown from the dark, from strange angles, from directions that make no geometric sense, because they were flung randomly by forces millions of years ago. They don't respect planetary order, they don't trace elegant patterns, they fall in on steep, chaotic slopes that cut across the solar system like diagonal scars. That is what we expected here. That is what the math predicts. That is what every simulation says should happen. But then something impossible happened. This object entered almost perfectly along the same plane where every planet orbits. That razor-thin disk, the ecliptic, the grand solar racetrack that defines the architecture of our cosmic home. Statistically speaking, this is like throwing a dart from another galaxy and having it land on the edge of a spinning coin. Astronomers tried to justify it with probability distributions, Monte Carlo simulations, and even perturbation models, but no matter how they slice the data, the alignment sticks out like a monument. This was not a random angle, this was precision or something that mimics precision. And this is where the discomfort grows. No one is saying it was aimed, that would be reckless speculation. But even the most conservative researchers admit privately that the trajectory looks curated. Too clean, too mathematically elegant, too perfectly positioned to simply dismiss as random drift. Because if an object arrives from interstellar space with no prior gravitational relationship to our system, then the odds of landing inside that thin cosmic sheet are vanishingly small. It could have entered from above the North Pole of the Sunday, from below, from any slanted arc across the three-dimensional ocean of space. But instead, it glided along the solar system's equator like a blade sliding across silk. It's like the universe placed it in the exact lane where we'd happen to detect it. And that is the detail no one wants to discuss publicly. Here is the philosophical fracture this causes. If the path of this object is not purely random, then interstellar space may not be as chaotic as we assumed. And if interstellar trajectories have patterns, then something organizes them, something shapes the distribution, something is carving lanes into the void. In economics, people panic when they see markets move in lockstep because it implies hidden forces coordination. In astrophysics, a trajectory like this implies the same thing, structure where there should only be noise. Then another angle emerged. If this object came from the galactic thick disk, the ancient layer full of dead stars and primordial debris, then maybe this is not the only one. Maybe these objects move in streams. Maybe this wasn't a lone traveler, but part of a pattern we have never recognized because we've never been in the right position to see it. This could mean interstellar debris travels in corridors. Gravity sculpts migration routes. The galaxy has shipping lanes we never accounted for. Imagine discovering that the Milky Way has highways and humanity just saw one vehicle drive through. The public will never panic about this because they don't understand what it means. But the people who run the simulations, they saw the slope, they saw the ecliptic match, and they realized something cold and clinical. This object behaves as if there are rules we have not mapped. We are not dealing with a random pebble, we are dealing with a pattern clue, something that tells us that the universe is not a messy scatter, but a structured network. And if that is true, then interstellar space is not empty chaos. It is architecture. And the next revelation, the chemistry, is even more shocking because it suggests this thing was forged in a place we have never seen. To grasp how disturbing the chemical readings are, you have to understand what makes an object normal in our solar system. Comets from here have a predictable recipe. Water ice dominates, dust grains match known mineral families, and metals appear in familiar proportions. It's the same cosmic pantry, repeated everywhere in our local neighborhood. When we sample those spectra, we are essentially reading the same periodic table rhythm over and over again. Nothing exotic, nothing poetically strange. But this one was different. This one spoke a completely different chemical language. When researchers inspected the gases this object expelled, they weren't just surprised, they were confused. It awakened too early, farther out than it should, because the frozen materials inside respond to heat differently than anything we've actually cataloged locally. Instead of water vapor as the lead player, it was dominated by carbon dioxide, and not just a little more, but by overwhelming margin. It was inverted, almost as if the priorities of its chemistry were reversed compared to our expectations. The ratio was so disproportionate that researchers were forced to consider that its formation environment might not resemble anything within the familiar spiral bands of our own galactic neighborhood. But the situation became even more unsettling when metallic vapor signatures were detected, specifically nickel, but with no iron at the same time. That should be impossible. Nickel and iron aren't just related, they are bonded twins in cosmic metallurgy. They are born together inside supernova cores, fused side by side in the furnace scars of dying stars. They travel together, they cool together, they condense together, and they appear together everywhere we look. To find one without the other in the wild suggests formation conditions that break the logic of stellar evolution itself. It suggests a nursery for matter that doesn't match the typical death cycle of a star. It suggests a process we have never modeled. Then came the pivot moment. As the object approached closer to the inner system, water vapor finally erupted suddenly, dramatically as if some external trigger unlocked a deeper layer. And then iron finally appeared, restoring the expected sibling relationship. At that moment, the object began to behave like a normal comet, but only after it had already shown a completely alien personality first. And that duality is what rattles scientists the most, because it implies that what we are witnessing is layered formation memory. Every phase of sublimation reveals a different geological epoch of the object's origin story. That would mean the object is not simply one thing but several worlds fossilized into one artifact. It could be a multi-generation relic, a shard that lived through more than one star system, or at least more than one formation environment. A kind of layered archaeological core sample from the cosmic deep. This isn't something humanity has ever had access to before. Every molecule vented now is a testamental chemical letter from a star system older than ours. And if these isotopic ratios, these metallic compositions, these inverted gas priorities hold up under further spectroscopy, then we are essentially reading the oldest physical script we've ever encountered, matter forged before Earth even existed, now spilling into our sunlight for just a brief window of cosmic time. This is the kind of chemistry that forces textbooks to be rewritten. Because if this object proves that the galaxy contains multiple chemical dialects that form stable structures, then our version of chemistry, the terrestrial version, might just be one flavor of many. We've been carrying the arrogant assumption that our periodic table's patterns are universal. But these readings imply that chemistry is influenced by stellar environments far more radically than we assumed. Our theories don't predict this, our models don't expect it, and yet the data is real, the spectral lines don't lie. Which leads to a single, uncomfortable realization. The galaxy may be filled with matter that behaves in ways we haven't even imagined yet. And if this object is just one of thousands like it, then we've only scratched the surface of what alien truly means. Not alien as in biological visitors, but alien as in physical reality that doesn't follow our rules. And this realization leads directly into the next question, because if this object forces us to expand the chemistry dimension of our understanding, then the next dimension will stretch something even more fundamental. What happens when objects like this don't just distort our science, but distort our sense of scale, risk, and vulnerability? When people hear the phrase collapse, their instinctive reference point is economic. Their mind jumps to layoffs, inflation spikes, real estate downturns, banks folding, supply chains freezing. Humans anchor fear to the things that affect rent, groceries, mortgages, salaries. Because the economy feels close, it feels touchable, and it feels like the thing that can actually disrupt daily life. That's why most people think recessions are the ultimate threat. But the truth is that recessions are shallow wounds compared to what cosmic events represent. A recession rearranges the conditions of our comfort. An interstellar anomaly rearranges the conditions of our understanding. An economic collapse threatens stability. A cosmological anomaly threatens reality. And this is the part no one is emotionally prepared for. Markets always recover because markets are artificial systems built on agreements. They can be rewritten. They can be renegotiated. Prices are psychological instruments. Debt can be restructured. Currency can be replaced. Entire monetary frameworks have dissolved across history and been rebuilt in a decade. But physics cannot be renegotiated. There is no bailout for broken laws of nature. If an object from outside our system forces us to revise how matter behaves, how chemical ratios form, how sublimation triggers work, how trajectories align, then we are not simply dealing with a curious visitor. We are dealing with evidence that our model of the universe is provincial. Imagine discovering not that your economy was fragile, but that your worldview was naive. That is the true collapse. This is why the scientific community is more quiet than dramatic. People expect panic, but scientists aren't panicking, they are processing. Because this object represents an existential check. Not existential like we're all going to die. Existential like we might have been looking at the cosmos through the wrong keyhole. For generations, we have treated the laws of physics as if they were carved into reality like eternal stone tablets. Every new discovery fit neatly somewhere into the same conceptual universe, but this one breaks that neatness. It refuses to be filed away. And this is where a subtle psychological fracture forms. When physics falters, humans lose the illusion of mastery. If models can be invalidated by a single unexpected visitor, then what else could slip between our assumptions unnoticed? What if this is not rare, only rare to us because we're too blind, too limited, too young as a species to notice the patterns happening on scales we don't yet track? This object forces a change in posture. It makes our species go from confident narrator of cosmic reality back to student, back to apprentice, back to beginner. And that shift of status is more destabilizing to the human mind than any market chart falling into red. Because once you accept that the cosmos is stranger than you believed, you start asking questions you never allowed yourself to ask. Not mystical questions, foundational ones. Questions like, if the galaxy has many chemical dialects, does it also have many physical regimes? If trajectories follow patterns, does that imply hidden architectures? If interstellar debris is layered, does that mean the universe preserves memory more literally than we assumed? These are not financial fears. These are existential revisions. A recession ends, discovery does not. And this is why the next phase, when this object returns to visible space, is the moment scientists are bracing for. Because once it emerges from behind the solar curtain, we will get data not filtered by inference, but by direct observation again. And that data may force one final psychological rupture. Not, how strange is this object? But, how wrong were we, and for how long? And it's that next moment, the reappearance, that could reshape everything. When people hear the phrase collapse, their instinctive reference point is economic. Their mind jumps to layoffs, inflation spikes, real estate downturns, banks folding, supply chains freezing. Humans anchor fear to the things that affect rent, groceries, mortgages, salaries. Because the economy feels close, it feels touchable, and it feels like the thing that can actually disrupt daily life. That's why most people think recessions are the ultimate threat. But the truth is that recessions are shallow wounds compared to what cosmic events represent. A recession rearranges the conditions of our comfort. An interstellar anomaly rearranges the conditions of our understanding. An economic collapse threatens stability. A cosmological anomaly threatens reality. And this is the part no one is emotionally prepared for. Markets always recover because markets are artificial systems built on agreements. They can be rewritten, they can be renegotiated. Prices are psychological instruments. Debt can be restructured. Currency can be replaced. Entire monetary frameworks have dissolved across history and been rebuilt in a decade. But physics cannot be renegotiated. There is no bailout for broken laws of nature. If an object from outside our system forces us to revise how matter behaves, how chemical ratios form, how sublimation triggers work, how trajectories align, then we are not simply dealing with a curious visitor. We are dealing with evidence that our model of the universe is provincial. Imagine discovering not that your economy was fragile, but that your worldview was naive. That is the true collapse. This is why the scientific community is more quiet than dramatic. People expect panic, but scientists aren't panicking, they are processing. Because this object represents an existential check. Not existential like we're all going to die. Existential like we might have been looking at the cosmos through the wrong keyhole. For generations, we have treated the laws of physics as if they were carved into reality like eternal stone tablets. Every new discovery fit neatly somewhere into the same conceptual universe. But this one breaks that neatness. It refuses to be filed away. And this is where a subtle psychological fracture forms. When physics falters, humans lose the illusion of mastery. If models can be invalidated by a single unexpected visitor, then what else could slip between our assumptions unnoticed? What if this is not rare, only rare to us, because we're too blind, too limited, too young as a species to notice the patterns happening on scales we don't yet track? This object forces a change in posture. It makes our species go from confident narrator of cosmic reality back to student, back to apprentice, back to beginner. And that shift of status is more destabilizing to the human mind than any market chart falling into red. Because once you accept that the cosmos is stranger than you believed, you start asking questions you never allowed yourself to ask. Not mystical questions, foundational ones. Questions like, if the galaxy has many chemical dialects, does it also have many physical regimes? If trajectories follow patterns, does that imply hidden architectures? If interstellar debris is layered, does that mean the universe preserves memory more literally than we assumed? These are not financial fears. These are existential revisions. A recession ends. Discovery does not. And this is why the next phase, when this object returns to visible space, is the moment scientists are bracing for. Because once it emerges from behind the solar curtain, we will get data not filtered by inference but by direct observation again. And that data may force one final psychological rupture. Not how strange is this object, but how wrong were we and for how long? And it's that next moment, the reappearance, that could reshape everything. Right now, it is hidden behind the sun, not metaphorically, but physically. And when something vanishes into the solar glare, the world enters a kind of suspended expectation. We know transformation is happening. We know radiation is rewriting the outer layers, vapor is exploding off the surface, and minerals are being rearranged like a kiln firing clay into ceramic. But what no one can predict is the form it will take when it exits that furnace. Will the structure come out intact? Will it fracture into multiple pieces? Will it shed material that reveals a deeper interior? Or, and this is the most unsettling scenario, will the object we see on the other side behave like an entirely different category of matter? We're not just waiting to see how bright it looks when it reappears. We're waiting to see whether our models survive contact with it. There is a moment in every scientific revolution where humanity realizes that an assumption we believed was solid was actually temporary. The re-emergence of this object could be that moment. We might witness the first real observational evidence that interstellar objects don't just travel through star systems, they evolve inside them. They don't simply erode, they transition. Phase changes may not be a side effect, they may be their purpose. Imagine an object that carries chemical memories from one star system into another, but those memories cannot be accessed until the correct type of radiation hits it, as if solar systems act like keys in a lock. The moment it exits from behind the sun, telescopes will snap to its coordinates like a global reflex. NASA, ESA, ground observatories, photometric arrays, and probably even private orbital assets will be pointed toward one pixel in the sky. People think scientists are calm and objective, but in this case, there are researchers who are actually emotionally invested because, for the first time in decades, they are not updating a model, they are confronting a frontier. And here's the haunting part, this object has already demonstrated that it can contradict our expectations. If it shows one more contradiction when it reappears, even a subtle one, the consequences cascade. Because this doesn't just influence astronomy, it influences cosmology. It influences planetary formation models. It influences our understanding of galactic chemical inheritance. Every discipline that assumes laws are universal must then rethink the word universal. People aren't ready for that. When you tell the average person that the stock market might crash, they panic because they know what it means. But when you tell them physics might bend, they shrug because the consequences aren't obvious to them. But those consequences are far more dramatic. Every piece of technology, every material, every structural constant, every predictive equation stands on the assumption that the universe behaves consistently. If this object proves that different star systems create matter that behaves differently, then our definition of reality becomes provincial. Not wrong, but partial. And partial models fail catastrophically when exposed to deeper truths. So, what scientists are truly watching for isn't beauty, it's inconsistency. Because inconsistency is the signal. If the object reappears with altered albedo, altered tail vector, altered gas ratios even slightly, that would imply that matter can shift identity under stellar conditions far more dramatically than we ever predicted. That would mean every stable property is only stable under local conditions. Which means the universe is not a single sandbox, it is a mosaic of conditional physics. That would be the moment where we stop pretending that the universe is one story and accept it may be a library. And that acceptance, not panic over economic downturns, is the true psychological collapse no one is prepared for. Because financial systems can be rebuilt, but a shattered worldview leaves no blueprint. Which brings us to the unavoidable ending, where everything converges into one single, brutal question that refuses to be ignored. What if what emerges from behind the sun isn't the same object that disappeared into it? When people hear the word collapse, they imagine markets folding. They picture banks shuttering, currency devaluing, economic forecasts turning red. They brace for financial pain, for layoffs, for struggle. That's what collapse means inside the human frame of reference. But there is a different type of collapse, the one that removes the floor beneath certainty itself. Not the collapse of wealth, the collapse of what we thought we knew. Most civilizations across history never faced this type of rupture because they never lived during a moment where reality itself pushed back. They never expected to see something that contradicted the laws they believed were fixed. But today we are living through one, and most don't even realize it's happening. While the world debates interest rates, while people worry about the price of fuel, while commentators argue endlessly about elections, recessions, GDP projections, something is happening behind the sun that makes those concerns feel embarrassingly local. A traveler from a star system older than our sun is undergoing a transformation we were never trained to interpret. The next time it becomes visible, it may not match the object that entered the glare, and in that discrepancy, if it happens, lies the true impact of this story. Because that is the moment where humanity will be forced to confront a truth we have resisted since the Enlightenment. We do not fully understand the universe we live inside. We've told ourselves the story that we're nearing the summit of knowledge, that physics is nearly complete, that the universe is mostly solved, with only a few missing decimals. We've convinced ourselves that the last great mysteries are minor dark matter here, dark energy there, small theoretical wrinkles left to iron out. We assume the map is 95% drawn, and we only have to fill in the corners. But this object is not a corner case. It is a mirror showing us how small our assumptions really are. If matter can flip identities, if trajectories defy probability, if chemistry arrives in layered timelines, if polarization behaves backward, if physical parameters change under radiation, then our model is not complete, it is provincial. A local rulebook mistaken for a universal law set. And the collapse this triggers is not economic, but philosophical. Because when you lose confidence in your model of reality, when you finally admit the universe is not obeying the script you wrote, you don't just rewrite formulas. You rewrite the definition of truth. This is the fracture most people are not prepared for. They're prepared for inflation. They're prepared for layoffs. They're prepared for housing bubbles. Those are problems they believe they can solve with cash flow, policy, austerity, or innovation. But no amount of money can bribe physics to behave differently. No central bank can stabilize the periodic table. No government can negotiate with matter. If this object re-emerges changed, if it exposes inconsistency in what we believed was universal, then we are witnessing something far bigger than recession. We are witnessing the moment where our civilization realizes that the true frontier was never economics, politics, or markets. It was reality itself. And this moment happening quietly behind the solar furnace might be the first crack in the wall. When it returns, astronomers won't be looking for beauty or spectacle. They will be looking for inconsistency. Because inconsistency is the evidence. Inconsistency is the message. Inconsistency is the moment where our species goes from pretending we understand the universe to finally admitting that we've only been reading one chapter out of an infinite book. This is not the collapse of money. This is the collapse of certainty. And that is the collapse absolutely no one is prepared for.